The wind tore across the valley that morning like a warning no one understood. The frost bit at the wooden frame of a small, creaking cottage nestled just beyond the hills, where the sun rose slower and life moved quieter. Inside, Miss Evelyn Hart stood at the stove, hands trembling slightly as she stirred the morning porridge, worn slippers dragging against the floor. She wasn't just a teacher. She was the one who stayed when the school shut down, when the townspeople moved away, when the new highways skipped over their village like a forgotten page. No family, no husband, no children of her own. But she stayed, for the few kids who remained. They called her Miss Evie, and she was everything to them. She never asked for anything in return. But that day, something, or someone, came knocking. It wasn't a gentle knock. It was weak, like someone barely had the strength to raise their hand. Miss Evie opened the door and found a man slumped on her porch, soaked in blood and snow, breathing shallow and slow. He wasn't from their town. His coat was tailored, far too fine for their part of the world. His shoes looked like they belonged in a city, not on a dirt path leading to nowhere. His face was pale, his eyes fluttering between worlds. She didn't ask questions. She pulled him inside, laid him on her bed, and began tending to him with the same care she gave to her sick students. It wasn't the first time she cared for a stranger, but something about this man felt different, like she was supposed to. That night, as the oil lamp flickered beside him, she noticed his hand clutching something inside his jacket. She gently pried it open and found a notebook, a leather-bound journal filled with pages upon pages of names, numbers, and maps. None of it made sense. But something told her this wasn't just an ordinary man. Still, Evelyn didn't try to solve any riddles. She fed him, cleaned his wounds, and whispered prayers like lullabies. She didn't even know his name, but she watched over him as though he were her own kin. Days passed. He drifted in and out of fever dreams, mumbling things like, "They're looking for me," and "Don't trust the man in the gray hat." Evelyn didn't know what he meant, but she kept the door locked and refused to leave him alone. Sometimes he'd wake up gasping, his eyes wide with terror, but when they met hers, they softened. Maybe it was the calm in her face. Maybe it was the way her voice sounded like it belonged to someone from a different life. She told him nothing about herself. He asked for nothing either. But between spoonfuls of broth and cold cloths pressed to his forehead, an unspoken bond took root. Then one afternoon, she noticed something odd. A black car parked at the edge of the valley. No one ever came down that far, not unless they were lost. Two men in trench coats stepped out, surveyed the area with sharp eyes, and left after a few minutes. Evelyn didn't tell the man. She simply double-bolted the door that night and sat beside him until morning. He was healing, slowly, painfully, but he was alive. And one morning, he sat up and finally spoke clearly. "Thank you," he whispered, voice dry like paper. Evelyn only nodded. She didn't need thanks. She just wanted him to get better. But as the man regained strength, so did the secrets swirling around him. He wouldn't say who he was. He wouldn't explain the strange notebook. And then, one morning, he was gone. Just gone. Left before sunrise, without a note or a goodbye. Evelyn was heartbroken. Not because he left, but because she feared he might still be in danger. That all her care might have been in vain. 3 weeks later, a lawyer in a sharp gray suit showed up at her doorstep with a letter and a key. What he said next left Evelyn speechless. The man she had nursed, the stranger who never told her his name, was worth more than she could imagine. And he had left everything to her. The envelope looked ordinary, cream-colored, sealed in wax, and bearing a name she had never heard before. Nathaniel Greystone. The man in the gray suit stood at her door as though the wind didn't exist, his shoes polished, coat spotless, eyes unreadable. He introduced himself simply as Mr. Danton, an executor of estates from a city Evelyn had only ever read about in magazines. He spoke carefully, as if the truth he carried could shatter her. "Miss Evelyn Hart," he said, "you are the sole beneficiary of Nathaniel Greystone's estate." For a long moment, Evelyn said nothing. The name meant nothing to her. But the feeling in her chest, the one she had felt when she found the man bleeding on her porch, burned hot again. She clutched the envelope as though it might vanish. Mr. Danton explained further. Nathaniel had left behind multiple properties, bank accounts, and stocks under different names, all now legally hers. "There's a safe house in the city," he said, handing her a small, rusted key. "And a message meant for you." Evelyn didn't ask why. She just nodded. 2 days later, she boarded a train she'd never dreamed of riding. With a borrowed coat and a hand-me-down suitcase, she arrived in a city that smelled of ambition and silence. Her shoes clicked against marble floors, her breath caught in glass elevators, and when she reached the address listed on the letter, she found herself staring at a penthouse door overlooking the skyline. Inside was silence, until she found the envelope on the table. Written in Nathaniel's handwriting, the note was brief. "You gave me life when I had none left. I had money, but no meaning. Take it, use it. Find those who still believe in good, and help them survive." The next morning, the story broke on the news. Nathaniel Greystone, reclusive tech billionaire, found dead weeks ago. Fortune mysteriously vanished. Evelyn stood in the penthouse window as helicopters hovered in the distance. She was no longer invisible. She was at the center of something she didn't yet understand. But the key, the key, was just the beginning. Back in her small town, people whispered about her disappearance. The school board sent a replacement. Her students cried quietly in their homes. No one could reach her. But Evelyn hadn't left forever. She had left for answers. Because in the safe hidden inside the penthouse was a USB drive, and on that drive were files that didn't belong in the hands of just anyone. They contained deals, accounts, bribes, everything Nathaniel had run from, everything someone wanted buried. And Evelyn? She was the wrong person to trust if you wanted silence. She had lived her life ignored. But now, with a fortune at her fingertips and secrets burning in her bag, she was ready to fight. Not for revenge, but for every child she ever taught to stand up when no one else would. And somewhere deep down, she knew. Someone was watching her already. The safe was hidden behind a panel that blended into the penthouse wall, camouflaged with luxury. The key fit without resistance, as if it had been waiting for Evelyn her whole life. Inside was not treasure, but something more dangerous. Several black hard drives, a file marked, "If I Disappear," and a photograph of Nathaniel holding a child in a refugee camp, eyes hollow yet haunted with purpose. Beside it, a sticky note. "If you find this, don't trust the men in suits. Go to Kansas City. Ask for the librarian. He'll know what to do." Evelyn sat back, her heart pounding. She had expected confusion, maybe grief. But this? It was a map to a life Nathaniel had never spoken of. A life that didn't match the man gasping for breath in her cottage. He hadn't just been a billionaire. He had been running, hunted, hiding in plain sight. And now, it seemed, she had inherited not only his wealth, but his enemies. The very next morning, the penthouse was broken into. Evelyn had left early, gone to the rooftop garden to think, and returned to find the front door ajar. Not a single thing was stolen, but the safe had been opened. Someone else had a copy of the key. She didn't call the police. She packed the files into her bag, covered the safe with books, and checked out without a word. The news was swirling with rumors about Nathaniel's mysterious heir, about missing funds, and about a hidden will. But Evelyn didn't care for gossip. She booked a bus to Kansas City. She didn't travel first class. She didn't wear the designer clothes found in the closet. She sat at the back of the bus, wearing the same faded sweater from her schoolhouse, her fingers clutched around the USB. She remembered the kids she taught, how they trusted her because she saw them, really saw them. And now, she had to do the same for a world that seemed lost in its greed. When she arrived in Kansas City, she followed the note to a narrow bookstore between two forgotten buildings. Inside, dust floated in shafts of amber light, rows of untouched shelves. An old man behind the counter, white beard down to his chest, eyes like he'd read every truth and every lie ever written. "I'm looking for the librarian," she said softly. The old man didn't flinch. He simply reached under the counter, pressed a button, and a wall slid open. "You must be her," he said, as if he'd been expecting her for years. Down the hidden corridor was a vault of information. Files, names, locations, all connected to something bigger than money. Nathaniel had uncovered a global network of exploitation disguised as business. Politicians, tycoons, judges. He had the proof. And now Evelyn did too. But so did the people who had chased him. As she left the building, someone was already watching her. A figure in a black sedan followed her for 7 blocks before disappearing. Another one took its place by the train station. Evelyn wasn't paranoid. She was aware. Someone wanted those files buried forever. But she had made her decision. She would not run. She would teach the world what Nathaniel never got to finish. They tried to scare her. The next hotel she checked into was ransacked while she stepped out for a sandwich. Nothing stolen. Just everything overturned. Drawers yanked open, mirrors cracked, suitcase slashed down the middle like a warning. Still, Evelyn didn't shake. She cleaned up the room, stitched her bag back together with a sewing kit from the front desk, and sat at the desk copying every file from Nathaniel's drive onto hidden USBs. It wasn't just about Nathaniel anymore. It was about the system that had forced a brilliant man to live like a ghost. It was about the students she used to teach, the ones whose parents had been crushed by these same corporations. Now Evelyn had evidence. Names, offshore accounts, secret meetings, photos no one had seen. She just needed a voice to release it. So she called an old student, Marcus Clay, now a journalist in New York City. Years ago, she had stayed late to help him learn to read. Now he had a column and a camera crew. When he answered her call and heard her voice, he whispered, "Miss Evie, you're alive?" She met him in a quiet diner off the interstate. Marcus didn't ask many questions. He listened, took notes, scanned the USBs with trembling hands. "This is a bombshell," he said. "They'll come after you." "I know," she replied. "That's why I chose you." Within days, Evelyn's name hit headlines across the country, not as a mystery woman, but as a whistleblower. The story ran on every network. Orphaned teacher exposes billionaire conspiracy with dying man's files. The nation gasped, not just at the scandal, but at the woman behind it. Reporters flooded her inbox. Billionaires threatened lawsuits. But support poured in too, from people she'd never met, from parents, teachers, janitors, veterans. The forgotten ones. The ordinary ones. Just like her. But the danger wasn't over. 2 nights later, someone tried to ram her car off the highway. She swerved into a ditch and crawled out shaken but alive. And that was when she decided she would no longer wait to be hunted. She returned to her hometown. It was there, in the same schoolhouse where she once taught spelling and songs, that she held a press conference. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't wear jewelry, just her old cardigan and glasses. She stood at the chalkboard as cameras clicked, the blackboard behind her reading, "Truth Matters." In her speech, Evelyn didn't rage. She simply explained how silence allows power to grow unchecked, how care can heal even the dying, how teaching had always been her fight, and now she was teaching the world what matters most. Then she pulled out Nathaniel's last note, the one he left in his journal. She read aloud. To the one who stayed when everyone else left, you are the story worth telling. And at that moment, across living rooms and courtrooms and classrooms, people listened. Not to a billionaire, not to a politician, but to a woman who had once been invisible and now stood tall with the weight of justice in her voice. But someone else was watching from afar, a figure Evelyn hadn't seen in months, and he wasn't dead. The morning after her speech, the town awoke different. Not because the world had suddenly changed, but because someone had shown it was possible. Evelyn walked through the same dusty school gates, but this time she wasn't alone. People followed. Mothers with strollers, retired miners, college students with phones raised to document her steps. The woman they once called just a teacher now walked like a flame lighting the path. But not far behind, in the shadows near the old church ruins, stood a man in a heavy coat and sunglasses. He leaned against the wall like someone waiting for a signal. No one noticed him. But Evelyn did. She turned just slightly. Her breath caught. It was Nathaniel Greystone. Alive. No longer pale or shaking, no longer bleeding on her doorstep. His face held new strength, but his eyes were the same, haunted, aware, grateful. That night, after the crowd had left and the lights dimmed, she found him waiting inside the classroom. "I had to disappear," he said, voice low. "There were people watching. I didn't know who to trust. Until you." Evelyn didn't speak. She just pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. In silence, they shared the same space again, teacher and stranger, survivor and witness. Nathaniel told her everything. He had faked his death with help from an international whistleblower network. The inheritance was real, but it was a test, too. A way to see what someone would do with power born from compassion. Evelyn passed in ways he never imagined. But now, she wasn't the only one in danger. The syndicate they'd exposed was larger than expected. Their reach stretched across continents. "I came back," he said, "because I want to stand beside you, not behind you." Evelyn looked at him not as a billionaire, not as a secret fugitive, but as a human who needed saving once, and who now wanted to save others. "Then let's finish what we started," she whispered. In the weeks that followed, they launched a foundation together. Not in their names, but in the names of teachers, nurses, caretakers, the invisible heroes who hold up the world. They used the fortune to fund schools in forgotten places, to protect whistleblowers, to teach children the meaning of truth. And though enemies still lurked in the dark, Evelyn no longer walked alone. She had the world behind her. Because sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to spark a revolution. And somewhere in that quiet town, in that one-room schoolhouse where chalk dust still floated in sunbeams, a plaque now hung beside the window. It read, "She didn't change the world by being rich. She changed it by being good."